very innocuous term, challenging, to describe it, but it was, more than challenging. In bits, it was traumatic because I interacted with the publisher and the editor from a very early stage. And at every stage, I got feedback, which was not always positive. So there were periods in which I, questioned my skills as a novelist, as a sort of a debut novelist, as a writer. You know, had serious doubts about the plot, whether it was headed in the right direction, and so on. So I think it is a period. I'm not trying to be discouraging, but it's a period of the period of writing a book is can be extremely stressful, and it sort of rubs your ego in the ground. But there is a reward at the end of it. So it's really a trade-off between the hard work you put in, the trauma and stress that you go through, and the sheer joy of seeing a book in print with a nice cover and your name on it. So at the end of it, on balance, I would think that the joy sort of compensated for everything I went through before that.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily use the word noted, but certainly I'm a columnist and I write on economics and finance, which is possibly the driest area that you could write on. There is a fundamental difference and some similarity or some skills that you pick up as a columnist. Uh, Obviously, when you're writing a column, it's much shorter. You are commenting on specific issues, events, developments. So you have, something to write on, to put it bluntly. Whereas when you're writing a novel or fiction, you are creating something. There is nothing really to go by, unless, of course, there is some, basic research that you've done on the topic. So in that sense, the two things are very different. Trivially in terms of size, more substantively in terms of content and the way your sort of creative process works. But writing a column regularly, and I write, I think, four a month, does give you a sense of discipline of being able to sit down in front of your computer and churn out a page of reasonably coherent material. And I think that certainly helped me, but I did have to unlearn a lot of the scales of the techniques that I use almost subconsciously in column writing when it came to writing fiction. So that's really the difference.
Right.
It was largely driven by extreme boredom and the boredom that came from writing these very dry reports and columns on the financial markets and the economy. But more seriously, I have always liked the genre of crime fiction ever since I was a child, and I grew up in Calcutta, where you have a lot of Bengali crime writing, which is almost mandatory to read as a child. For example, Satyajit Ray's Feluda, and so on. But I sort of retained that interest, and I, as an adult, have read a lot of crime fiction, largely Western crime fiction. But I think what really inspired me was the incredible stuff that's been happening on television. Some of the television serials that have been coming out both from Europe and America, which I think have taken this genre of crime television almost to high art, and I was very, very influenced by some of them, and I just decided to figure out whether I could sort of use my skills as a column writer partly and make a transition to putting together something very much on the lines of what had been sort of inspired by in terms of some of the Western serials. So my book is very different. I think it does have, in terms of structure and so on, I think it has a sort of a Western feel to it, although it's very sort of deeply rooted in the city of Calcutta, which I, for some reason, don't mention in the. I don't mention the name in the book, but I think the inspiration really has come from uh, stuff like television, stuff like Bad Detective, The Killing, and so on. And I would really recommend people to people who want to write crime fiction to both read crime fiction as well as watch the stuff. It's incredible. It does, because writing fiction is not just about language. It's also about stories and ideas, and you could, and in this world of very sort of diverse media that are now available, you could sort of turn to things other than just fiction for inspiration. And I think uh, one tends to look down upon stuff like television serials and so on, and they have the stigma about it.
Yeah.
But the stuff that's happening now, I think the way they've been crafted, the way they've been, it's like really good cinema work, which I think is always an inspiration. But this has taken it really beyond that, and this new genre of crime television, I think, can be a source of, not directly a source of material, but certainly a source of inspiration and influence is possibly the word that I'd like to use in, writing in a crime fiction.
Right.
I'm reasonably convinced that writers should write about a milieu that they are familiar with and they know the sort of the nuances of. So I would find it very difficult to set my novel in, say, Oslo, where a lot of the Scandinavian writers, the Norwegian sort of greats like Joe Nesbo have based their novels. So you have to write in and about familiar territory. So that's why I chose Calcutta, where I grew up. I know I claim to know the city well. I'm not very sure, but in terms of construct and structure and the way you approach the story, I believe that it's not a very sort of Indian approach. Some people have said that it's very American and classic American in its approach. Some people have said that we've sort of borrowed elements from Nordic writing and again television. I think all this is true. I'm reasonably sure that I haven't plagiarized anything, but certainly influenced by these different things. But I think I would like to sort of emphasize the point that I started with, that it's important to write about a milieu of characters that you understand and are familiar with.
Correct.
Otherwise, there is no authenticity.
Um,
And there's enough going on here that you can sort of write about without necessarily having to write about, Jake and Samantha. And,
exactly.
Well, let me be sort of a little, pessimistic and perhaps a wet blanket for writers. India is not a very large market, particularly for English language writing, right? Although there are, more and more publishers coming up, the reading base, especially for young writers, is fairly limited. We seem to have more lit fests than readers. So one has to sort of accept the fact that if you are, I don't think it's very difficult to get published if you have good material. But post publication, the book isn't likely to sell, say, 1,000,000 copies or whatever that you sort of see on blurbs or successful, Western writers that you pick up. It's a limited market, and you have to accept the fact that you perhaps can't sort of do it full time and make a living from it right at the outset. I mean, you can sort of aspire to, move towards getting adequate success so that it sustains you, as a person, if it's put food on the table. But it is not very difficult to get published, but it's difficult to get read extensively, and that I think is something that young writers should be aware of. But I think there is a sort of a little ecosystem of readers, writers, bloggers, critics that has emerged in India, which is very encouraging. And it's not as if you will not get feedback on your book. There are serious readers who would give you both, positive and nasty feedback. And sites like Goodreads and so on, where you could, get all this. But again, the reading base is limited, and you have various sort of other things competing for mind space. My daughter, for instance, who's 15, does not read a single book, right? But she's addicted to Netflix, for instance. So you have to really sort of appeal to her sensibilities to sort of push a book to her. So.
Right.
I think it does, and I think the younger generation is sort of really sort of plugged into the idea of digital entertainment and access to digital material. So I think if you publish a fashion book with a dust cover and so on, I think it's much easier to be read and disseminate what you've written. So I think the internet space is where a lot of new writing will come up. I think it's now really limited to just blogs and so on, but I think even full novels and so on, could very easily be accepted in the sort of the internet world, much more so than a physical book. Now, I'm from a generation which insists on actually holding the book and smelling it before, reading it. But I realize that that's really passé now. So I think the digital space is where you should aspire to, write and make your presence felt. I think, you might aspire to be a writer, but the question is, do you have a good story? And you might be very good at language. You can, really sort of turn a phrase. You can use fancy words. But I think the core of, writing fiction is having. I think a lot of people miss that point, and they say, "Look, I write so well," and etc. Writing fiction is yeah. So sorry. What I was saying is that if you want to write fiction, you need to have a good story. Period. You cannot depend just on your writing skills, on your command over language, and so on to produce a book. You need to have a good, solid story. And that's what writing fiction is all about. So if you don't have a good story, don't write. This is very harshly put, but I think this is what is really the bottom line. And one just has to see some of the younger American writers, who spin such fabulous, stories out of various situations, not just crime, but I would take the example of someone like uh, Jeffrey Eugenides, who's written 3 books, which are absolutely brilliant. You just have to sort of have this ability to think up a good story and to tell it well. That's what writing is all about. The language comes later. So if you think you have a story in you, and a story which is authentic, not picked up in bits and pieces from different sources, and it's a story that you understand and you're familiar with. We discussed the issue of territory and milieu earlier. If you have that right, don't try to mimic a formula. There's always sort of a first mover advantage to formulae. So there's a lot of stuff on mythology coming out, but there are the Amishes of the world who, shown they've shown the way, but they are sort of the leaders, and they continue to be leaders. So just falling back on that formula might not really work. So don't be formula driven, be authentic, and just have a good bloody story.
Right.
I come from a generation which has read authors that might not be entirely familiar to the sort of the newer in digital friendly generation. So I like people I like some of the American authors like John Updike and so on. I write some of the British and American writers like Jeffrey Eugenides, I mentioned that, Jonathan Franzen, and so on. And among the crime guys, I would put Joe Nesbo, and I like an English writer. She's actually Scottish. I should be Dickens, and come up with a single name. I really can't think of one.
I'm sorry.
One book I wish I had written is this very is a book by John le Carre, and I should have mentioned him as one of my favorite authors. And le Carre, as you know, is a spy writer, but at the early stages of his career, he wrote a very, very intimate detective novel set in a very posh public school in England, and it's called A Murder of Quality. It has very few characters in it. It's very sort of slow moving, but I think it's the most brilliant, work of crime fiction that I've ever read, and I wish that I had the ability, to write that. So, A Murder of Quality gets a thumbs up. It's incidentally available as a movie, free on the internet. So, if people want to see it, do see it, and it's something that it just tells you how you do not have all sorts of contrivances, all sorts of very complicated twists and plot, but yet have a solid, good murder mystery.
Great.
No, just a couple of things that I thought I would be relevant. One was something that we discussed, that I think increasingly people should aspire to write for the digital world, and perhaps there are some changes. I wouldn't say changes in style, but changes in format, etc., that the digital world demands, and that's something that people should get familiar with. I think writing for writing fiction, but with the ultimate goal of being of your book being made into a film or a television material is a very strong, motivating factor. I've just sold my sort of book rights for a sort of a Netflix production. So, it's not, you might not sell, but there are so many other things that you can do with your book, which is
Absolutely.
very rewarding. And finally, this is sort of an old man's rant, but just, read and read, because, and watch a lot of television, because you just need those. You can't just sit there and produce something. You need to be in this atmosphere where you're soaking in stuff, be it from books or from television or from films, and then doing your own thing.
Right.
So that's my short sermon to you.
Great.